Yesterday I completed a 100-mile bike ride and then decided it wasn't enough and went straight into a 10-mile run. Now, of course, I'm training for an Ironman, so this is kind of standard, but this is the first time that I have learned a really unique lesson about my type 1 diabetes. See, I had plenty of chances to learn new lessons about overcoming mental difficulty and physical pain, but the lesson I learned about my type 1 diabetes admittedly was unexpected and ended up giving an enormous amount of insulin. Granted, it's all contextual, but I will be sharing, if you stick around to the end, the amount of insulin that I gave, why I gave it, and how I knew that even when doing 9, 10 plus hours of exercise, I needed extra insulin and not less, and how you can use that decision-making framework to identify potential problems and pitfalls in your own diabetes management. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Van de Vecht. I am a certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist. I live with type 1 diabetes, and it's my goal to push the boundaries and experiment with my blood sugars so that I can share that knowledge with you and with my clients that I coach who have type 1 diabetes, in hopes that we can shortcut some of the difficulties, frustrations, and dangers for you and get you closer to living your best life with type 1. So we're going to get into our theme song, and then I've got one heck of a story for you. Actually, 3 stories. Let's go. All right, first things first, because I am beyond stoked about this, like actually proud of myself. I completed my first century ride, which is 100 miles on the bike. Wild. I've never done that before. And it was also part of a brick workout, which in the triathlon Ironman world means you're doing back-to-back workouts. So it was 100 miles on the bike and then 10 miles running. Now, it was interesting because I had a plan mapped out. In fact, I'll put the picture on the screen. I shared this on my Instagram the night before I went down this. And I said, oh man, I'm planning for my first 100-mile ride. And I was sharing part of my fueling strategy. And for endurance athletes, you have to calculate a number of things in order to enable your body to last that long, to endure 10 hours of exercise, right? Because it's a very difficult thing to do, obviously. So I shared, I ended up packing, I think it was 34 or 35 gels. So that each of those is 22, 21, 20 grams of carbs. Now each of those gels also has caffeine, it has amino acids, there's electrolytes to consider. So a lot of different calculations on how many carbs per hour, how many electrolytes, what's your sweat loss look like, how much caffeine can you take on without putting yourself at risk of going too far, but you need enough so you're not getting too tired. And just the whole thing, how much water to take in. It's a lot of calculations, a lot of planning. But as a type 1, on top of all of that, I have to consider my blood sugars, right? How to manage them during these insane athletic feats. And I, in the past, hired multiple coaches, some of them with type 1 diabetes as well, to discuss my strategies, different formulas for blood sugars, looking at dietary needs, different considerations for insulin pump adjustments. Long story short, we came up with a plan that eventually has me going from, I think I start with a 40% basal profile, so reduced basal, 60% less. And by the end of this day, I was supposed to be at 95% reduced basal, so 5% of my total basal, and tapering throughout the event. I knew an hour into it that I had to change the plan, that I had to zig when diabetes zags, because diabetes does not always follow the rules, as I'm sure you're well aware of, right? So an hour into it, I made a very aggressive decision, and I start these events off with a relatively large dose of insulin as well, because as an endurance athlete, I actually have to consume lots of carbohydrates. So the goal is anywhere between 60 and 100 grams of carbs per hour of these exercises to replenish your muscle and liver glycogen, mostly muscle, while you're doing these events, right? And so to consume that many carbs, I have to make sure I have the right amount of insulin so I'm not going high or low, which presents a challenge in and of itself. So my goal was to start things off with insulin so I can jump right into consuming carbs, right? The issue is that the insulin I gave did not cover the amount of carbs that I ate. I got some carbs in, and then when I went for the second batch of carbs in the first hour, my blood sugars jumped. they went high. I was like, uh-oh, we're in for a rough day. So this happened once before as well. And what I recognized is that ultimately I either needed more insulin, a different site, or something else that I was ignorant to was plaguing me. And something we talk about in previous episodes, the ignorance tax, is a tax that you pay for being ignorant of the true problem. Right, so if I didn't know what could go wrong, and something that I didn't know could go wrong went wrong, that means I wouldn't know what the problem is, which then means I wouldn't know how to fix it. So I need to reduce my ignorance as much as possible through self-experimentation, research, hiring coaches, life experience, all that kind of stuff, right? So ultimately, what ended up happening is I identified the root cause, which is that over the last week, I had bad insulin pump sites. And I hadn't yet perfectly identified if it was the site location where my insulin was being delivered or if it was the insulin itself. And so the night before, made a switch to a new vial, and that's actually based on a recommendation from my wife. And I knew that, but she was like, why don't you just do it? And I was like, all right, fine, right? So thankfully, she was there to push my decision over the edge, and tried new vial, new sites. I think in a week, I had like 7 site changes. It honestly, and I'm going to be really transparent right here, it pissed me off. I was on the verge of just kind of like a breakdown, honestly. Just one of those weeks with diabetes where I was like, I hate this. This is so hard. I'm doing everything right. I am, aware of all of these variables, and I'm very intentional about my carb counts and corrections and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And nothing's working. And it's been a week of frustration, to say the least. And so heading into this bike ride, I knew something was wrong with either my site or my insulin. I knew the insulin worked. I knew the sites worked, but they weren't working well. So what I discovered was that for my meals, and I had calculated this, how much extra insulin was required for each meal and in between meals that I had to give in the form of corrections, right? Giving correction doses of insulin. And through that calculation was able to determine how much extra insulin to give during my bike ride and run. So it gets calculated a bit differently, right? Because on a standard workout where I have everything working correctly, I need less and less and less and less and less insulin as the day goes on. With this one, I did need less and less and less, but I started way up here, right? So I started needing an enormous amount of insulin. And then from there, yes, it did go less and less and less and less and less, because as the day goes on, I get more insulin sensitive. My liver and muscle glycogen is depleting, so I need less basal as well. But I started so high that by the end of 9 hours of exercise, I had essentially worked my way down to what's a normal day baseline when I haven't worked out at all. So let's put this in perspective for a second. I had to bike 100 miles and then run 10 miles over the course of, I think it was 9 hours in total. Let me calculate my head. 5, 4, 9. So we started at 7 a.m., finished at 4 p.m. 9 hours of exercise just to get my insulin working to the point where it was as if I hadn't exercised at all. Oh my goodness. I was happy to be back to my normal baseline, but frustrated. That's what it took, right? And this is a common mistake that a lot of people make, is throwing it out to the wind and going, well, that was weird. I just needed a bunch of extra insulin. It's time for you to get your diabetes detective hat on and go, okay, what happened so that I can avoid that in the future, right? Because if I don't figure out the problem, then the next day, which is today, I would have enormously high blood sugars again, because I'm not going back out for a 9-hour workout 2 days in a row. That's just not feasible, right? And I actually have seen people use exercise after I've taught them, like, hey, exercise lowers blood sugars. Instead of taking more insulin, or instead of getting to the root cause, they'll just go exercise more. And that sort of works. I've done that too, to a certain extent. But it's very demanding of your attention, of your time, of your energy levels, right? And it's just not realistic for most people. So we have to get to the root cause, which for me, and I did this as soon as I got home, I came home from that event and I was a little bit high. So I ended my run at, what was it? I think it was like 129 or something. I was very happy with it. And to be fair, I was in range almost the entire time, the whole 9 hours, right? So that's the good part. Blood sugars, I was able to force them to cooperate, but I was unable to get enough food in. So that did impact my athletic performance, but diabetes-wise, that was fine. So it finished at 129 and it started creeping up and up and up and up because the exercise stopped, right? Glucose burn rates are done. Remember, my site or the insulin's not working great. So shot up and up and up and up. I got to like 190. And I was like, what the heck's going on, man? Now, giving insulin after 9 hours of exercise is a very difficult thing to calculate, because you are in such an insulin sensitive state that, you take a unit before and it drops you 50 points. You might take a unit now and it'll drop you 300 points, right? It's actually a very serious thing. Can be dangerous. So I gave a third of a unit, nothing happened. Gave another third of a unit, a little bit happened. Gave a final third of a unit, was like, all right, I guess we're going for a full unit. And you guessed it, nothing happened. I was like, crap. I think I need to make some big changes. So tossed the vial, tossed the site, fresh start on everything. And it was like, please God, let this work. I put everything on new and went into dinner and took some insulin. Nothing happened. I was like, oh, my heart sank. And honestly, my wife can tell you just the shift in my attitude. I'm not perfect by any stretch. I was a little overwhelmed. A little emotional, and she was there to hear me out, thankfully, but I needed to vent. And I was like, Lisa, I don't know what to do. I'm starving. I've been working out all day. My blood sugars are stuck. I've changed my site like 7 times this week. I just changed it again. Nothing is working. She's like, man, that sounds really hard. She's a great listener. And man, long story short, I was like, well, let's add more insulin, even though this is a dangerous thing to do, right? But the situation seemed to call for more, so I added more. Still didn't budge. I was like, well, I'm going to at least have a bite. I need food. My body's going to shrivel up if I don't get some calories in, right? So I was like, all right, time to be bold. I've got juice and dextrose and maltodextrin in the fridge from my ride today that I didn't consume. So let's go crazy. Worst case, I'll just have to eat the whole kitchen, And I threw insulin at it and was like, Hail Mary. This is the do or die moment. And finally, my blood sugars came down. I was like, oh, praise God. And one of the reasons behind this, why it didn't come down at first, is if you imagine, I've got the entire day of bad insulin still going through my body, right? The last couple of hours of basal just weren't really effective. The correction I gave wasn't really effective. So the initial dose that I had given for dinner was making up for the basal that wasn't working. So I had essentially balanced out to 0 and then had to add that aggressive dose to cover dinner. So it's really interesting when you think about it. But the big picture to take home here, a couple different big pictures actually. One, adaptability. If you have to have this superpower of adapting to new situations with diabetes. And it starts with you putting your diabetes detective hat on, all right? Now, that looks different for everyone. For me, I'm very analytical. This is why I thrive as a type 1 diabetic coach for other type 1 diabetics, because I love looking at CGM graphs and reports and pump settings and injections for those of my clients who are on MDI, and pulling apart the information and finding the root cause of what's going on, and then building a plan on top of that so we know how to actually fix it and not just throw Band-Aids all over everything, right? But there's certainly something to be said about simple detective work, where you just get curious and you ask, I wonder what happened there, right? And base knowledge is required if you're going to be your own detective, understanding what could lead to higher blood sugars, what can lead to lower blood sugars. See, I knew exercise is supposed to drop me, and when it didn't and I went up instead, that was my hint. That was the clue that pointed me in the direction of a plan needing to change, needing to adapt. the entire day. And it worked well enough, right? I completed everything, felt great at the end of it. Good news, I'm ready for the Ironman. My coach even said so himself. But the goal for diabetes on that side of things is to be able to switch things up at the last minute when you need to. Not if, but when. And I say when because, and this was a podcast episode I did, like years ago at this point. We've been doing this for a long time. The 5% rule. 95% of the variables within type 1 diabetes, that's on us, right? It's in our control. To some degree. I choose what I eat. I choose how much insulin I take. I choose if I go for a walk or if I didn't sleep well last night. X, Y, Z. Those are on me, which means I have power to control them. I have influence over them. But 5% of the time, 5% of those variables, there's stuff that's just out of your control, right? You get a hormone imbalance in your body. Something's different. Okay. It's out of your control for the most part, right? My insulin went bad. Ooh, okay, that's kind of out of my control. The sites went bad. That's kind of out of my control. But being able to identify those before it gets too late, right? Had I continued with the plan and stubbornly stuck to the plan, I would have had significantly less insulin than I would have needed, and I would have had way more carbs than my body could have handled with the lowered insulin. So I would have ended up in DKA. Actually, had I followed the plan start to finish that was set out for me, that would technically have worked if everything else was working properly, like my insulin and my sites, I would have been in the hospital with DKA. Okay, blood sugars probably would have been in the 1,000+ range. Not exaggerating, because all things going according to plan means I would have consumed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grams of simple carbohydrates. And in the absence of appropriate insulin, that spells disaster. And add on to that, extended periods of exercise means that my body is desperate for energy. It's going to break down the wrong stuff. Blood turns acidic and DKA, right? So it's important to recognize these things before they get out of hand and to note when the shift is necessary. So what we're looking for are simple clues that our body is leaving us when the expectations don't match our reality. I expected blood sugars to go down after giving insulin before I go on a bike ride. They didn't go down. Okay, so my expectation no longer matches my reality. Plan needs to change. I need to adapt. What's most tricky about this, as you heard me mention in the beginning of this episode, the ignorance tax, right? If I didn't know what to look for, what to expect, what the plan was, I would have completely wrecked my entire day. It'd probably put my health at risk, right? I would have been paying the ignorance tax. Now, a lot of you are shooting yourself in the foot right now, and you don't even know it. You're making life more difficult than it needs to be with blood sugars, just simply because you don't know what you don't know. Right? And you will continue to pay that ignorance tax until you learn those lessons that your mistakes are offering you. See, challenges in life, like yesterday, that was a challenge. And if you watched the previous episode titled My Diabetes Prayer, I think is what it was called, I mentioned how, every day I pray. I'm a Christian, and I used to pray for stable blood sugars. It's like, God, please, just give me a nice, easy day. Which sounds kind of silly, but I was like, why not? We'll just throw it in there. And I changed my prayer recently, a couple months ago, to, Lord, I pray that you would help me to learn the lessons I need to learn in order to make progress and to be ready for my Ironman race. And yesterday is a prime example of that. What happens if, on race day, my blood sugars are running higher from adrenaline? Which they probably will. Well, now I'm ready for that because I know what it's like to give insulin, give insulin, give insulin, give insulin. Oh my gosh, we're still giving insulin, right? While exercising. That's wild to think about. But now that I've had that experience, I'm no longer ignorant of the strategies or of the root cause. I'm able to use that to move forward and make forward progress. So you might be shooting yourself in the foot without even knowing it because you are ignorant to the root cause. So a big part of expanding your knowledge on the root cause is what I said earlier, getting coaching, getting curious oh God, I think another C one, that sounds cool. Getting community, that kind of works, right? But ultimately, we need to find the root cause so we can actually find a solution and not just throw Band-Aid fixes at it, right? I mean, yesterday I could have just stopped eating entirely, but I would have, they call it bonking, right? Where your body shuts down. I would have bonked, not even halfway through that. It would have been a rough day. So, yes, it can get you through things in a pinch if you just force it to work. But the reality is we got to get to the root cause if we expect to actually find a solution. Now, I told you guys if you stuck around to the end, I'd tell you about the amounts of insulin I took. So I told you I was meant to be at a 95% reduced basal rate, which is a 5% of total basal, which is virtually nothing. It's basically like unplugging your pump, right? It's insane. And instead, I was not only running at 100% of my basal the entire time, since the 1 hour marker, which by itself is kind of nuts. But on top of running a 100% basal, which is 95% higher than it was supposed to be, right? I think I have never been great with percentages, but I think that's how that works. In addition to my basals being at 100%, which is what they would be on a rest day, not when I'm exercising, I was also giving insulin on top of that. And I ended up giving insulin, I think, 4 or 5 times to make sure I could continue to consume carbs and stay in range and all that jazz. Absolutely wild. Now, in addition to my sites being rough and insulin maybe not working as well as it should, that's probably a big part of the situation I ran into. I also wanted to zoom out and look at my own factors, right? The 95% of the stuff that I control. I realized that over the last week as well, I've been eating slightly different foods. And the reason is that my wife hasn't had time to go to the grocery store. Neither have I. So I've been just going to the cupboard. I'm like, what's left? You know, and what was left is a lot of nuts and seeds. And so I've been consuming a lot of higher fat content. Higher fat can lead to higher levels of insulin resistance, which also leads to stickier blood sugars that end up higher, right? So this is part of what we call the 3 levels of blood sugar impact in our programs. That's our level 1 impact. Lifestyle variables, diet choices, these are things that can cause blood sugars to want to go higher or to be more insulin resistant at a foundational level. So my baseline was just higher blood sugars, right? So of course, when I go to consume simple carbs during exercise, if my baseline is higher blood sugars and higher levels of insulin resistance, of course, I'm gonna need to exercise to bring that back down to baseline, right, to establish more of that normalcy behind my numbers. So it's a really interesting game of tug of war that we get to play with insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. And I think yesterday's workout was a perfect example of that. Whether it was bad insulin or insulin resistance or whatever, mix of the 2 or 3 with bad sites, the reality is that I needed to introduce insulin sensitivity, the workout, in order to balance it out, and extra insulin because it was so far off, in order to keep blood sugars relatively stable and in range. Looking back even further, a week before this, so last week I had a half marathon, and in the last mile, it was actually the last third of the last mile, so literally like 2 minutes from being done, I tripped on a rock and fell on a pile of rocks and destroyed my knee, which was already borderline injured. So add inflammation to the mix. That's another thing that can push blood sugars up. I mean, there are nearly countless variables that can cause blood sugars to go up and down. It's just a matter of mapping them out. That's one of the things I walk my clients through. And that's why blood sugar formulas can be so helpful, is that you don't have to think through like these 50 variable checklists every second of every day. You just lean on your blood sugar formulas like I did, where an hour into it, I was like, okay, things aren't matching up with my current set of expectations. Time to shift. Time for me to put my renegade warrior on, right? And to think differently. As you see on my hat and on my shirt, you kind of think differently when you encounter these situations, and you will. And actually, big shout out to one of our Warriors Tribe Plus members. I won't tell you his full name, just protect his identity, I guess. But Gio, wanted to say congrats, man. So Gio actually just finished his first Olympic distance triathlon. And I don't exclusively work with triathletes by any stretch. He's one of maybe 4, you know. But most of my clients are just trying to get blood sugars in check so they can enjoy life again. Flexibility with food, play with the kids without worrying about going low, and just live with more normalcy, more quality of life. But Gio happens to be another triathlete that I'm working with, and he's going through our modules right now, and he just crushed his first Olympic distance triathlon, and mentioned that he was using the formulas, got a perfect plan in place, knew exactly what to do with the insulin, the carbs, and everything, but made an error and left his insulin in the car. It was like, oh, damn. But he adapted like a pro. Now, blood sugars didn't cooperate perfectly, but he finished the race. He did a great job. And what I wanted to just shout him out for is today's lesson, right? The plan changed. So you have to be able to adapt. He did. And he said that before and after the race, I think he was like 92% time in range. Amazing. So just serves as another example to show you that if you can adapt, if you have your blood sugar formulas set in place, nothing, not even diabetes, can stop you from living your best life. So that's the core of today's lesson. Find the root cause, get curious. You got to think differently. And once you have a good awareness, a good understanding of the variables, you're able to better adapt with whatever life or diabetes throws your way. And I wanted to share this story especially because I know a lot of people might look at my numbers and they're like, Matt's been over 90% time in range as an average for 5.5 years or whatever it is now. His A1C is always like low sixes, high fives. He's just got different diabetes. It's just easier for him. No, I still have challenges. I still have days where I want to throw in the towel. I still have days where I don't know what went wrong and I have to put my diabetes detective hat on. And I'm like, okay, what do we get going on here? Something is very wrong. I need to fix this. But when you have blood sugar formulas set up, you're able to have a foundation to lean on, right? Where things allow you to have more perspective, but also a bit more peace, knowing that there is some consistency. We just got to uncover it, right? So, and by the way, we're doing a whole workshop this week with my private clients in the Warriors Tribe Plus, where we're going over the Metabolic Reset workshop. It's a blast. They're going to talk about lowering your A1C, how to reverse insulin resistance, boost insulin sensitivity, understand the roles that all of our diabetes variables play in the metabolism and where you might be shooting yourself in the foot, right? It is closed to the public. It's just for clients, but I do want to share with you a training you can go check out for free. It's for anybody who wants to know more about blood sugar formulas, how I adapt when things don't look right, how I know exactly how much insulin to take, not take, carbs to go for. All these things are simply puzzle pieces in your diabetes management, and all you need is a little help finding where the pieces go, right? And getting maybe the picture on the box to help you map out everything. So if you want to check that out, you can go to diabetesinaction.com. It's for everyone. It's not just for athletes or just for guys or just for anyone. It's literally open to everybody, and I highly believe that you would benefit from watching it if you haven't seen it yet, or going to watch it again. Take some notes if you've seen it before and it's been a little while. So diabetesinaction.com. Remember that diabetes doesn't have to hold you back. This is not the end. It's simply a different path that we all get to take. All right, so I hope you found this one useful. Drop a comment. Let me know if you liked it. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe if you like this and want more of it. We'll see you guys next week. Have an awesome day and keep up the fight.